When a human starts talking about something that matters to them, telling a story, giving an example, talking about a cause, talking about a project that they really care about, the frequency changes or the vibration. I am generally looking for a feeling that I'm getting from the other person. So if it's somebody that feels like they're not a good communicator or this is not their thing, I am finding that moment and then I'm trying to expand it, trying to point it out, because what I'm seeing in that moment is like a frictionless delivery, a state of connection within themselves. And so it's impossible as the person listening not to also feel connected to it.
Explore the minds and marketing strategies behind today's winning brands and businesses. Tap into the power of the creator economy with Earned by CreatorIQ.
Good morning, good evening. Welcome back to Earned. I am so excited. I have a little bit of a different guest today. Tim Fortescue, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So Tim is a communications and speaking coach. I'm going to give him the opportunity to give a little bit more background, but just so you know the rare air he occupies, he has worked with leaders across companies that you may or may not have heard of, like Visa, LinkedIn, HubSpot, Meta, NASDAQ, Workday, and more. The list goes on, including CreatorIQ, which is where Tim and I got to meet each other for the first time. So really excited to have you on the show. And also, I think timely in terms of communication is always important, but feels more important today than ever before, where connection and community and the ability to, really tell compelling and impactful stories in a way that drive progress, I think is probably more important today than ever. So again, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So you taught me this, but before we dive in, I want to know a little bit more about the why. Tell me why you do, what the road looked like that got you here, and how that drives your approach today.
I always wanted to be a coach since I was probably in my late teens. It was the one thing I knew I wanted to do. And I didn't know the shape or form it would take. I thought maybe like a teacher and a coach at a high school, or maybe be a college basketball coach. That was the sport I played. And so I tried for years to figure out the right combination of having a day job and then doing moonlighting as a basketball coach. And for 12, 15 years, that's what I did. I had a day job, which was a career, like a legitimate day job. And then I would go to a basketball gym and coach 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old basketball players and do that almost year round. And I didn't have kids yet. So at that point, I was like, this is great. Get home at 9:00 at night and start the day. The next day, do the same thing again. It wasn't sustainable. And I wasn't making any money as a basketball coach. You get like a stipend for the whole year and then you work year round because you love it. And so it wasn't working, the dream I had. And I was looking for, is there another way I can do this? Or should I give up on the dream? And it was almost like serendipity around that time, because I had this public speaking kind of workshop thing that was on my calendar at the job I had in the day. It was like a professional development workshop for everybody that worked in my office. And I thought, cool, I'll check it out. And I went to this workshop and I was so struck, not by the public speaking stuff, that stuff was good, but it was the way that the instructor taught. It totally reminded me of the way that I tried to teach my players in practice. I tried to change the dynamics often, and I tried to keep it fresh. I tried to keep it moving. I tried to keep them involved, keep them active. And we were doing the same in this class and learning these semi-profound things about ourselves in the process. And so at the end of the class, I went and thanked the instructor, said, this really made a difference. And he kind of held on to the handshake for a second longer and said, you could do this. And I said, no, I didn't. But he gave me his card and said, if you're ever interested, I could teach you this field, how it works. And you don't need to quit your job. I'm not trying to poach you, but you can do this on vacation days. I'm building this company. And I, of course, immediately said yes. And before I knew it, I was in his boot camp and like learning how to teach public speaking and communication courses. And this was in like 2014. So flash forward 6 months. And I'm in some of the places you mentioned, some of the companies that I couldn't believe. I was teaching courses or even coaching individuals at places like L'Oreal or Intel or ESPN,
Yep.
Google, Facebook.
To name a few more.
Yeah. And it was a total like pinch me moment and imposter syndrome.
I love that. So, okay, a couple of things. One is, what do you think the coach in that setting saw in you that made him hold on to that handshake a little bit longer and pull on a string that obviously was already there?
Wow. I don't think I ever asked him that question. So I'd love to say it was because I was such a fantastic communicator and public speaker, but I doubt it was that. I think it was more he saw the way I engaged. Maybe he did see something in the way I communicated. And I never asked that question, but I feel like I owe him an email to say, hey, what was it all those years ago?
I guess follow-on question, what makes a good communicator?
Here's the big one. At the core of all of it, it's authenticity. You got to be yourself, and you got to be comfortable being yourself in sometimes uncomfortable or pressure, even feeling situations that feel like there's pressure. So it's the biggest no-brainer of all. Of course, it's authenticity, right? But how do you do that when you're nervous or when you feel like I don't fit in this room or I'm an imposter or you have some kind of negative self-talk going? So it's the biggest no-brainer, but how do you actually execute it? That's the journey.
Yep. And we'll get into that. Again, I want to switch the conversation a little bit almost into masterclass style, but I want to get back to kind of where we were in the story. So you were there, you started your professional coaching career. Although I will say, I would imagine you had a ton of learning experience in your high school basketball coaching. Communicating to teenagers is a real thing that probably gives you lots of feedback at all times. But you're in your professional coaching career. How did you decide to kind of go on your own and really start 40 Watt coaching, which is kind of what you've been doing more recently?
There's another epiphany, but this one came not with like serendipity, although maybe it was that in retrospect, but this one came with like a down in the valley low point. So the good point was flash forward 5 years with that firm and I loved it. I did great work. I built a team in the Bay Area and worked with some people that I still consider friends and cherish those relationships to this day. But my time had run its course and I got the bold and bright idea that I was going to go work for one of my clients. All of those high profile clients that you mentioned, I thought, oh, I'll just go work in-house and I'll join their learning team because that's what I do. So I joined Strike and I loved the company, still do, but I found a role that just wasn't the right fit, wasn't the right stuff that I was doing on both sides. So it was a relatively short-lived experience. And in the end of 2020, I lost that job. So that was right after my second child was born. We got a baby at home, a 2.5-year-old. And I was thinking, what am I going to do? And all the feelings that come with when you lose a job. It's like, I'm sort of embarrassed by it. What do I do from here? Do I hustle and try to get another job at another one of my old clients or somewhere else in my network? And that was my instinct for a little bit. But as I started having the early conversations, I just realized my heart's not in this. This isn't really what I want to do. And I know what I want to do. It was that thing I was doing before. I just want to do my own version of it. So I became an executive coach for a living. I did it. And around that time, got certified as an executive coach at a place called the Coactive Training Institute, which is based right in Centerville, not far from you, and launched my own business. I thought I was going to be teaching leadership and coaching leadership, but people still remembered me as a communication person in my network. So companies started coming to me and asking me, can you help our CEO get up on stage and articulate this message or deliver this with more executive presence? And it's like, sure, of course. I just started my own business. I need to bring in some revenue. So sure, I'll do that. I weirdly thought about it as that'll be the side thing. I'll teach or coach communication on the side, but let me expand this leadership development business that I started. And after about 6 or 8 months of fighting the niche that I had, I realized, let me just lean into this because I think I can get to bigger things with people through the front door of communication, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I can get underneath the symptom to the bigger taproot for people, which there's a lot we can unpack there.
I was going to ask, is there a difference between kind of communication coaching and leadership coaching? Because I have found, at least in my career, that 90% of the job is communicating. It's how do you lead from the front? How do you listen to people, whether that's your customers, your team, your peers? How do you put a message forward that like influences action and drives progress? So yeah, I was going to ask, is there a difference in the two? And it seems like through your work, you came to the same conclusion that maybe they're a lot more merged than one might think.
They totally are merged. And I'll give you this example. In the first 5 years of my career, what I knew was communication, public speaking related stuff. So if a company would bring me in to work with like chief marketing officer like Brit in the company to help on communication, I had one tool and I was using it. I was helping you speak better. And that's all I knew how to do. But the further I got into that, the more I'm realizing, okay, there's something else here for most people. Most people don't actually just need me to help them speak better. That's like the symptom or like the last 10% or even less than 10% of the work that needs to be done. There's something much bigger under the surface. And so that's the work I typically do now. It's much less getting in and helping somebody get ready for stage, although I love doing that work. That's what we did when we worked together for Chris. But it was the work of getting underneath that and figuring out what's really driving someone's behavior or their limiting beliefs. And how do we start to adjust that? That's the good stuff. That's the fun stuff. That's the really fun stuff.
Yeah, I really appreciate it in your story, the vulnerability. More of us than not have all been there in terms of hitting speed bumps along the way. Like I, for one, have been in between jobs. I've been let go from jobs, and it is hindsight. You can have the luxury of understanding how formidable that is, but it's challenging in all the ways. And I find that in our experience working together, that is one of your superpowers, is that you tap into people's authenticity. Vulnerability is not in a negative way, in like a very human way of like, what are stories, what drives you, what moves you that you can incorporate into the stories you tell so that you connect with people? Because ultimately, again, I think that's what it's all about. It's something that really stuck with me since our time working with Chris. That was 80% of what you did, is pulled out more of him so that he could be present on stage and tell a story that was from him, of him, like kind of one and the same.
That means a lot. I take that as a really big compliment. That was one of your takeaways from it. And that is how I see the value I bring. And it's also what makes Chris Harrington really fun to coach and work with, is that he is who he is. He is not afraid to show who he really is. And there's a warmth and an authenticity to him. That's a common profile of someone, not necessarily those traits, but the profile is he's got this giant talk track and this deck, and he's got a lot of weight he's carrying to get this message across for that audience. But oh yeah, the centerpiece is actually him. The centerpiece is his authenticity, his stories, his view, his perspective. And so to me, the deeper I get into this type of work, it's helping somebody figure out, what is that story? What are those stories? What is my perspective on this? And then how do I bring that out? Because when they start doing that, it is so much more fun for them and for the audience too.
Okay, so let's get into it a little bit. I want to use a little bit of the time today to provide the listeners with a bit of a framework for how they can think about their own communication. I know obviously kind of broad listener group here, but imagine us all as marketers who are all united by this common curiosity for pushing the envelope. We're in this industry, creator marketing. It's nascent. We're all pioneering this together. And so I think common characteristics of our listeners is within that. We're all storytellers. We all communicate in what we do, whether it's a creator, a marketer, somebody more established in their career, or just coming up. So what can we all keep in mind? Guiding principles, a framework, if you will, to guide our communication day in and day out.
In its simplest form, I look at communication as a left and a right brain exercise or activity. We're communicating to our audience's left brain or our right brain. Now, let me explain what I mean by that a little bit. If the listeners to the podcast are thinking about most meetings they attend, people are going around and sharing updates or even pitching a new idea. Most of the communication in meetings, just based on what I see, is left brain focused. It is the details, the logic, the rationale, the strategy. It's left brain, left brain, left brain. When we use our left brain to communicate to someone else's left brain, that's where we can seem a little boring. It's not to say that left brain is bad. I mean, left brain is the credibility behind our ideas. But when we shift to right brain, that's the storytelling. That's the use of metaphor. That's the call to action. Something else happens. We hit a different frequency, sometimes a different state of flow. And so that's what I'm trying to bring out of people often, because when it comes to work, we're so used to and comfortable with left brain based communication that we forget it's actually the feeling that we evoke that's going to stay with people. So how do we evoke an emotion? It's usually with story. If we're storytelling, which by the way, we can unpack that. People get really tripped up in how can I be a better storyteller? Well, step one is tell a story. Just tell an example. It doesn't have to be like masterclass level storytelling, but if you pick a story that helps illustrate the broader point, that's good. That's really good. It's better than most people. So I'll pause there because there's probably a lot to unpack in what I just said.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, in your experience, coaching individuals, what gets them to the aha moment of understanding what would a good story be here? Because I think I'm hearing what you're saying and I'm understanding it, but I don't have a grab bag of stories that I can just pull out and have at the ready. How do you get people there? How do you know how to contextualize something, how to pull the right story for the right moment in the right way?
in your role or in the role of a chief marketing officer somewhere else, there probably is a bag full of stories somewhere. It's what you're hearing from people. It's what you're hearing from your team. It's what you're hearing from people outside of your organization. And so the beginning of the answer is listening, but listening a little differently. It's listening with the intent to collect or even harvest examples and stories. Because at your level or at a C-suite or a VP's level, even a senior director, depending on the size of an organization, their job is less their section of the company and it's more big picture. It's more connecting the dots. And the way we can do that to show people what we see at our position in a company is through story. So it is about having the ear tuned to pick up on the right stories. And then in the moment, it's going with the story that is going to resonate most with that audience at that time, which isn't as hard as it sounds, especially if you've got stories that you like to go to often. And when I think about my work with Chris Harrington, before the event in October, I gave him just a couple prompts. I asked a couple questions and he said, yeah, I'd like to tell this story. And then he had another one. I'd like to tell that story. They're there. So the good news is for people listening, the stories are there. It's just a matter of bringing them in.
Yeah, I think too, this is something you've mentioned to me before and goes back to your kind of basketball coaching career, is that you got to get in the reps. You got to get in front of people and just start doing this. Even in your previous life experience, right? You were in sales. And so much of your communication was understanding who's in front of you and being able to build those direct connections. But that is, I believe, and maybe there's a question mark after the end of this, so much of that is muscle memory. Like you have to build that muscle of being able to listen actively to people, to, adapt your story so that it makes sense to them, that you're meeting them where they are and not just saying things from where you are.
During those years where I said I had a day job while I was coaching basketball at night, it may have felt at times like my job was coaching my high school basketball teams, because that's the thing I went to bed thinking about. How could I help my team and my players get better? But, the thing that paid the bills and also was fun in ways was I was a pharmaceutical sales rep, biotech rep, and then a medical diagnostics rep. So I was in like the medical sales world for 10 of those years. And I didn't think about this at the time, but that job was take a message that the marketing team usually develops and adapt it 150 different ways based on whoever you're speaking to. So sometimes a typical day for me was, say like in 2010, a day might have been, I see 6 or 8 different physician offices in various locations, and I am trying to tell a certain story, but I'm thinking about who my audience is each time. Where are they in terms of adoption of this particular product or service? And not only how do I shift the story, but how do I shift my delivery? I'm 6'5". I can tower over people in a bad way or a good way. Maybe towering over people is never a good thing. I was aware of it. I'm aware of physical space and just how do I shift my delivery so that it lands for the people on the other side as often as possible. Then I'm going into a gym and doing the same thing for a group of 15 basketball players. And as you said before, high school kids have a really sharp BS detector. And if something's off, they either tune out or they're going to, hopefully if the relationship's good, they'll call you on it. And so you had to be authentic. You had to be really be thinking about who the audience is. And I was shifting it a ton during those 12 years. At the time when I got into communication coaching or executive coaching, I thought, I have no expertise in this. Who am I? But when I look backwards, I'm like, actually, I modified messaging for like 10 or 12 straight years. And so there's the Malcolm Gladwell quote about putting in a certain amount of reps for expertise. In a way, as I look back, that's what I did. And that's what I'm teaching people now is how do you modify?
Yep. How do you modify? I think the thing to me about that example, when we put it into practice for ourselves is, again, if we don't have that intuition, if we're not kind of innately attuned to being able to land the plane of what we're trying to say to our audience, what should we ask ourselves? Like when I'm entering a conversation, what can I ask myself? How can I prepare? How can I start to build this muscle? What does that work look like?
It's just a few simple questions. Before a conversation, before an important meeting, before any meeting, okay, stop and ask yourself, who am I speaking with? Where are they on this topic? Is it brand new to them? They've heard about it before, but it's been 2 weeks since the last time I spoke about it. Is it they work on this topic just as much as I do? So where are they on this topic? And then think through stuff like, okay, what level of detail do I need to be speaking in for this particular audience? Do I need to be down in the weeds because that's where this conversation needs to be? Or does it need to be way up high because that's the bigger more important thing to who I'm speaking to, even if it's a group. And then also things like, are there particular examples? Are there right brain stories, examples that I can move this along that would resonate with them? Or should I cut right to the left brain stuff? Should I get into the details, the data, the information on that side? Does the person I'm speaking to, do they want me to cut right to the chase, or do they want to have small talk? All of those are some prompts that you can ask yourself before you go into a conversation, and all those things help you modify.
Yeah, I like that. I actually am even envisioning in my mind like a 2-column page of like left brain, right brain. It's like stories, the why, if that's kind of the bigger picture stuff, and then credibility, detail, logistics, if you will. I like that as a construct. I don't know if that's just for me, but I think it's helpful to think about it in like, if you can do a combination of these two things, you will have more success, again, meeting your audience where they are, not just where you are.
It's totally right. There's a communication model that was from the 1950s. And a year ago, I got really into like looking through communication models from different points in history and seeing, can I use any of this in the literature? And there's one that I use. There's one that I like. I like it because it's so simple. And on one side, there's the sender. On the other side, there's the receiver. And so as a sender, we are encoding a signal that hopefully can be decoded by the receiver on the other side or receivers. But the reason I love this particular model is that in the middle, there's this overlapping circle, which is on the model, it's purple or lavender. And I call it the purple zone because that overlapping circle it's your experience and my experience and where they overlap. So in order to be successful, quote unquote, in communication, I've got to think about the other side, and I've got to tailor my communication, or in these terms, encode in a way that lands squarely in the purple zone. Otherwise, I'm giving too much detail, not enough. I'm using the wrong points of reference. And it's theoretical, but I think it also being able to visualize this is the target in my communication, just stopping, pausing, and thinking about that in 60 seconds before you go into a meeting or whatever situation you're in can help significantly.
Okay, so we've been lucky enough to work together and with and for people who are, I think, more natural communicators. Chris Harrington's a natural communicator. I think you and I love communication, love to communicate. What about for people who don't consider themselves natural communicators, where this comes, a little bit less naturally? Does your coaching style differ for them?
In a sense, it's the same. I'm taking the same approach with both, but I'm looking for different things. Generally, what I'm looking for is frequency, a state of flow. And whether somebody is a natural communicator like Chris or somebody who would consider themselves not a natural communicator, when a human starts talking about something that matters to them, telling a story, giving an example, talking about a cause, talking about a project that they really care about, the frequency changes. Or the vibration. I don't have the right term for it, but I am generally looking for a feeling that I'm getting from the other person. And so if it's somebody that feels like they're not a good communicator, or this is not their thing, which is a common profile for a company to send my way, I am finding that moment and then I'm trying to expand it, trying to point it out and expand it, because what I'm seeing in that moment is sometimes like a frictionless delivery. I'm seeing a state of connection within themselves. And so it's impossible as the person listening not to also feel connected to it. And so everybody can do it, whether you are fantastic at this, quote unquote, or not. It's there. It's just about finding those moments, and it's hard to do it yourself, but I think you can feel it. When you feel something, the people that are listening to you can feel it too. So at its simplest place, that's what I'm looking for. And I'm trying to remove or reduce the stuff that doesn't have that frequency level as much as possible in the talk track or in whatever it is that we're trying to communicate, and trying to accentuate those moments where there's a strong connected frequency. Another way to name it would be strength-based coaching, if I can get that out, because we're looking to find where somebody's in their strength zone, their state of flow, and maximizing it and then reducing sort of the not weaknesses, but the stuff where it's just not as much resonance to the person, because there won't be as much resonance to the audience.
Yep.
I recently worked with a client who was in a prominent leadership position, had just been promoted at a company most of the audience would probably recognize. The pain point around communication was, when I go into this scenario with the top leadership of the company, I just want to get out of that room as fast as possible. But I've got this 5 or 10 minutes on the agenda where I've got to present or share my update. And what I find myself doing is just taking the template that the person before me or my boss used and just trying to get that done. And in my mind, I was 10 words, 10 minutes ahead. Just get me out of this room because I don't want to be here. So what we worked on together was finding that resonance. What do you want to say? If we could empower you to just go into that room and give the recommendation or the update, what information would you share? Not saying you have to do it right now. And the person paused for a moment and quickly came up with, this is exactly what I'd say. And as I heard her say this, we saw resonance. It just a whole other level of communication, this confidence, this frictionless communication, this state of flow came out because this is what really she wanted to say. And she is the expert in this area. So it was like stepping into the power of, yeah, this is what I'm being asked to do. I don't want to run out of this room. I want to share my expertise. And so then it wasn't just a snap of the finger where she just went in and did it because there were these mental hurdles to get through and emotional hurdles. But over the course of a couple months, it went from it's an idea that we see resonates to let's try a little bit of it and get validation. Did it work or not? To get then embracing all of it. And by the end of it, that's where she was. And it's like night and day. It's a total night and day situation for this client.
I think that's a great example too, because that's very different than prepping for a keynote up on stage. And I know you've mentioned that a couple of times in our conversation today, that you're not coaching for one thing. It's really about finding those unlocks. Who needs communication coaching?
Honestly, Britt, my first answer that I was going to fly out and I stopped myself with everyone does. And the reason I say that is because I coach people who are a lot better at it than I am. Often I see their videos before I start to work with them and I'm thinking, okay, this person is significantly better than anything I could do right now. However, they still need coaching. They are seeking coaching because they're looking for, how can I do what I do better? How can I find 5% more of whatever it is that I want to give more of? So the easy answer is I think anybody could do it. Anybody could benefit from it.
And then when do you know individual versus group setting? Because I know you do both. You coach workshops, you coach teams, you coach entire orgs, you've run like multi-day, multi-week programs. You've also coached individuals. So how do you know what you're looking for and how to kind of step into those conversations to ask for help?
It's usually driven by the client. The client will usually have a vision for, do I want to bring my organization, my company, my team through an experience where we get vulnerable together. We try stuff that maybe makes us feel uncomfortable, but we ultimately grow from it together. And then we come out of it with tactical, tangible skills. We can communicate better, but also there's something intangible about learning, about growing, experiencing something together as a group. So usually the client will come to me with a clear, not all those words, but a clear idea of, do we want this to be group or do we have an individual that we're trying to get ready for a certain event?
It maybe was a little bit of a loaded question on my point, just to kind of fill you in on some recent context. As you know, we are in the process of bringing two companies, two technologies, two platforms, two cultures together. And I think for me, it's really interesting thinking about, we've worked together to really help Chris put a stake in the ground, introduce himself to our customers, to our community, but by way of that to really introduce this new vision. But we're hitting that inflection point where the company needs to kind of take up that mantle now. And so in my mind, the initial need was to get up and deliver the first line with strength. But now we need the chorus and we need the unify, right? The harmonization of all of our voices to kind of be saying the same things, or to people to find their own style within a new story that's less familiar to them. So I was curious how, you putting your client's shoes on, what are some of those moments where leaders should think to themselves, ooh, this actually might be a good idea right now for us?
There's so much of a benefit in investing in people's career development and growth. So there's really not a bad time, except if the calendar's just too busy. And I'd even make the case that it's still worth it. I remember my brother worked at the YMCA when he just got out of college, and he sold memberships. And this was in the recession of 2008. And people were cutting back on any extra expenses during that time. It was actually like, oh, this is the time to keep your gym membership. This is the time to keep it because it's more important than ever that you are keeping healthy routines in a time like this where you probably feel a lot of extra stress and uncertainty. So it's kind of like that with team experiences. It's like, even when you are completely loaded and overwhelmed, it is still critical that you keep connection, you keep investing in people's growth. I saw Simon Sinek said recently, and something I was reading, business schools don't teach human skills. So it's on companies to do it. And there's a real opportunity for companies to teach these human skills. He doesn't like the term soft skills because it sort of implies that it's the opposite of hard skills. Like the hard skills are the things I need to actually do my job, and soft skills are these other things. He doesn't like that term. And after I read his quote, I feel the same on it. They're both extremely important. And so it's always a good time to invest in that stuff.
How do you think remote work and like hybrid work environments impact the ability to connect? And does that, again, change the way you think about communication in the virtual settings that we are often in?
Yeah, and the human to human side, you've got to be more intentional when you're remote or you're hybrid about making connection time, because you don't run into each other in the hallway. You don't see each other having lunch. You don't see each other in the parking lot or whatever the scenario would be where you bump into a colleague and then have a quick conversation. If that conversation is to check in, say hi, like build your relationship or friendship, or talk about a project, it's just not there. So the intentionality of making sure there's still that time, that's more important in this situation. And then if your question was more geared around, showing up and communicating strongly, I think the same principles apply. The weird part is that such a critical part of connection is eye contact. And so your eye contact now is looking at, and for me, a green dot on my MacBook. And I can see you out of my peripheral, but I can't really see you. So in a one-on-one, you can look down, but I mean, it's a different thing to be like, this is connection. And this is as weird as it sounds. Around COVID, we talked about this a lot more often because it was newer to people. So I think people generally have this. But if you've got a setup at home where you've got a couple monitors, I still see people where they'll be talking directly to the monitor where the camera isn't. And so their head is looking the other direction. And it's subtle, but it matters. If you're not connecting with eyes, it doesn't have the same impact.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about left brain, right brain. We talked about being authentic and really understanding where your audience is, meeting them where they are, using constructs like why, what, how in order to do that. Anything else that we missed in terms of the approach you bring to your customers that we can keep in mind today? Do we cover most of it? I know there's much more, but
the main things I teach when I teach a course are the what, why, how framework with left and right brain. So that's sort of like the basis for everything else I expand into. And then from there, it's stuff like being a better active listener. It is like, how do I take this framework and then drive alignment within my company with it? And then I do teach some actual presentation skills where you get up and have the executive presence and all that stuff. So, I mean, generally what we've talked about here is the heart of what I teach. I think it's also probably what makes my business different. What I find in my industry is if someone wants to be a better communicator, either through their work or just personally, there are resources available that teach you how to be a better public speaker. There's Toastmasters, there's master classes, there are workshops, there are companies that do a fantastic job. I used to work for one of them and I used to teach them. But most of what we do in our daily lives is not what most people would consider public speaking. Like 95% of our communication, 99% of our communication for some of us is one-on-one conversations. It's meetings with small groups of people, and that's it. There might be these moments where you're in front of a larger audience, but those might be once a quarter, once a year, depending on your role. If you're a senior leader, maybe it's every day or most days. But even still in those situations, most of your communication is smaller, it's informal. So given that, we've got this wealth of resources for how to be a better public speaker. If you put in the time, you can do it. So if that's the path you want to travel, I would take that stuff and then translate it to how can I do this in most of my conversations or in my smaller meetings. Then I think the frameworks that I've created, I think they hit those 95% moments a lot closer, which is if when I've got an idea that's kind of complicated, or I got an idea that I want to get my colleagues on board with, or I need to get them on board with, have I answered the what, the why, and the how? Have I spoken left and right brain, not just one or the other? If I've done those things and I've done it off the cuff, but I generally had these things mapped out, I kind of thought through the answers to those questions, and then left and right brain, and I did it in like 2 minutes. It's not like we have all this extra time to sit and craft all this stuff. But if you can even pause and think through those things before you go communicate about something, that's what I think makes the big difference. And that's what I do.
I love that.
That's what my company does. So that's what I do.
No, that's what you do. And honestly, that feels like such a good punctuation to this conversation. But since you are the communication expert, I want to ask you, what are good ways to close conversations, close those communication loops? How do you leave the room or drop the mic, if you will, at the end of a conversation, a presentation, a meeting in a way that feels punctuated?
Sure. Yeah. You close with an action step. What are we doing next? And then if it's a meeting, we want to be clear who's got the next steps. If it's a podcast, we want to be sure that people know, the listeners know where to go to get more information. So you just close with the action step.
I love that. Where can people go to get more information about you?
My LinkedIn is the place where the content will go out most often. And so you can look up Tim Fortescue on LinkedIn. And then my website is 40wattcoaching.com. And so there's some blog information there as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for spending the time with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This was so much fun.
Be a friend, tell a friend, and subscribe. Earned by CreatorIQ. CreatorIQ is your all-in-one solution to grow, manage, scale, and measure your influencer marketing program. Ready to unlock the power of the creator economy? Get started with a demo today at CreatorIQ.com.